Well, hello, and welcome to episode 25, the penultimate episode of Let's Translate Light Novels. This is a series where we look at an out-of-print light novel, the Fushigi Yuugi prequel, Seiran Den. It's about Nakago's past, and my patrons translate it, and I critique their translations, and I also critique the translations that I did over 20 years ago when I was an intermediate level translator. Check the video description for more information. And a quick little content warning for this episode, there's some war and violent imagery in here. If you've been following the series, you kind of know where we're at. Anyway, let's get into it. タリアが足をもつれさせて地面に突っ伏した。So, タリアが足をもつれさせる. So, the させるform of suru. So, to make this verb happen, to cause this verb to happen to an object. In this case, the object is her feet, ashi, or legs. I love how ashi means legs and feet. So motsureru is like to tangle. So motsure saseru is like to cause your legs to tangle. So Taria caused her legs to tangle. Jimen ni tsuppushita. So jimen is like the earth's surface, literally, if you look at those two kanji. So the ground. And then tsuppushita, it's to fall down, but think more like to biff it, to trip and you fall flat on your face. So patron A translated that as, Talia's legs gave out and she fell flat on the ground. That works. Gave out is not quite the same as tangled around each other. But I mean, I think that's kind of why her legs tangled around each other, is because she's been running very, very, very hard all the way from her house and being chased by soldiers. So that's a nitpicky comment. Her legs gave out is just fine. Patron B, in her haste, Taria tripped over her own feet and fell flat on the ground. In her haste is not really necessary. We already know that it's in her haste, and it doesn't say in the Japanese that it's in her haste, but if that were not in there, if it were just Taria tripped over her own feet and fell flat on the ground, that it might be a little lacking. So it's fine. In her haste is not really a big stretch. And yeah, tripped over her own feet is closer to the Japanese. With wobbly legs, Taria dashed along the ground. I guess small Sarah didn't realize what tsuppushita meant, or couldn't look it up or something, and just kind of guessed. No, small Sarah, it is not dash along the ground. It is to smash onto the ground, to fall. I like the wobbly legs, though. I think wobbly legs... it actually captures the ashio motsureru bit, but no, she's not running. Next section. 数メートル後ろについていた兵士たちがもう近くに迫っている. So, 数, this kanji can mean a lot of different things, but if it's before a unit of measure like meitoru, meters, it's several. So numbers of meters, literally, but several meters, ushiro, behind her, ni tsuiteita heishi tachi. So the soldiers who were following her several meters behind, mo chikaku ni sematteiru. So sematteiru is to be closing in, on their prey, basically, but closing in on her. And then chikaku ni is, they were already closing in on her very closely. They were... several meters behind her, but now they're already just about to close in on her. Patron A, the soldiers, still some meters away, were closing in on her. That works, except it's more, the first half of the sentence is they used to be several meters away, but now they're almost at her. So we're because she tripped over her own feet, now they're almost about to grab her, basically. So that's a little off. They were not still some meters away. They used to be some meters away. Patron B, now the Kuto soldiers were only a few meters behind her. This is good. You don't necessarily need, the Kuto soldiers who used to be to several meters behind her were now only, but yeah, they were now only a few meters behind her. Yeah, it's they were now closer to her. It's they used to be they used to be several meters behind her, and now they're almost within reach. Then now they're close. Small Sarah, the soldiers who had been separated several meters behind her were catching up. This is the most correct of all of these translations, but just note how, like, it sounds weird to be like the soldiers who had been separated several meters behind her were catching up. It is like more kind of what it was in the original Japanese, but it just kind of sounds weird to word it that way. I think we've covered this a lot in all of these episodes of this series, but you know how Japanese likes to describe a noun like the heishitachi, the soldiers. They like to describe that noun with just a lot of words in Japanese, like the soldiers who were several meters behind her eating ice cream cones while tap dancing and singing the Star-Spangled Banner were now close to her. It's like, you can do that in Japanese and it doesn't sound weird because the subject of the sentence comes after all of those descriptions. Like in English, you have to start it with the subject of the soldiers and then like, comma, who were all of these other descriptors. And like by the time we get through all of those descriptors, we've kind of lost track of who the subject of our sentence is, the soldiers. So in English, if you have that situation where like you want to describe the subject with all of these other things, like who were several meters behind her, etc. I mean, tsumitoru ushiro ni tsuite ita is not that long a descriptor, but it can still, even as you can see in small Sarah's sentence, it can still be a little tiny bit clunky. If you're like the soldiers who had been separated several meters behind her were catching up, it's just a little tiny bit wordy. But yeah, I'd say my problem with having all the words after the soldiers, if you just delete all of the other stuff, the soldiers who had been separated several meters behind her were catching up. If it's just the soldiers were catching up, that's the most important part that we're trying to get across. And we want it to sound more urgent. But by having all those other words in between, the soldiers and we're catching up, you make it sound less urgent. That's why I like patron B. Now the Kujo soldiers were only a few meters behind her. That really gets to the crux, the heart of what this is trying to say. Taria is almost going to die, basically. And, you know, it captures that urgency more if it's a shorter sentence and not so descriptive. Okay, next part. 母がタリアの元に駆け寄ってその体を抱き起こした。そのまま少女の体を抱きかかえるようにして母はこちらに向かって走り出す。So the mother, Matuta basically, Taria no moto, so to where Taria was, like within her space basically, within touching distance. Ni kakeyotte, so she ran or runs up to Taria, like right next to her. Sono karada wo, so in this case the sono is describing Taria, so it's Taria's body. Wo daki okoshita, so daki okosu is to pick up, like off the ground. Yeah, so she picked up her body off the ground is literally what that is, but we've gone over this, I think, before in this series. It always sounds weird to translate it literally like that, like her body, because in English, if we say a character's body, we often mean their unconscious body or their dead body. But Taria's alive. So, yeah, she ran over to Taria and, like, picked her up off the ground, basically. The next sentence, sono mama, and then just like that, and then, like, continuing with that momentum, shoujo no karada wo, so again, her karada, the girl's body, daki kakaeru yo ni shite. So daki kakaeru is like to hold, like a baby kind of. And then yo ni shite, so it's like she's kind of holding her like a baby. Haha wa kochira ni mukatte. So kochira in this case is ayuru. In Aryuru's direction, this way, towards Ayuru. Ni mukatte hashiridasu. Then she took off running towards Ayuru. So patron A translated that as, Matuta ran up to Talia, scooped the girl up into her arms, and started sprinting back to Ayuru. I love how it was combined in just one sentence. It gets to the point, it's concise, you get rid of all the weird, like, she picked up her body, and then she held her body, like, sort of like a baby. It's like, nah, just boom, boom, boom. I like that. It paints a good picture. Patron B, Matuta reached Taria and hefted her up, I love the hefted word, then broke into a run back the way she had come, now carrying the young girl. Interesting, I like the rearranging works here. Notice how in Japanese, hashiridasu is at the very end, and here it's in the middle. I like hefted her up, and I like broken to a run. Broken to a run is actually a more literal and accurate way of describing hashiri dasu. Hashiri dasu is like to take off running or to break into a sprint. Started sprinting is also correct, but yeah, broke into, I think just, it paints a better picture of it like, you can imagine her just explosively starting running and not just like starting to run. Like, ho-hum, I'm going to start running now, versus boom, I'm breaking into a sprint or breaking into a run. Small Sarah, Matuta ran up to Taria and grabbed her while hugging Taria tightly. Wow, hugging. Yeah, it just sounds kind of weird. Matuta ran back to her son. Hugging, I kind of like the hugging in here instead of holding. Hugging, it just shows that this whole daki kakaeru, it's sort of like holding her protectively, kind of. So I kind of like hugging. You ran up to Taria and grabbed her. That's fine. It's more like grabbed her off the ground, but then again, small Sarah didn't catch the part where Taria actually fell to the ground. She was like, she dashed along the ground. No, she didn't. She fell onto the ground. All right, then we have some yelling. Ka-sama! Ka-sama! Ayuru wa tamarazu kakedashita. All right, so tamarazu is like unable to stand it anymore, basically. Kakedashita, again, this verb and then dasu. It's like to begin to do the verb, but more like as like a urgent sort of way, usually. So kakedasu is another way of saying hashiri dasu. It's just to break out into a run, to rush, to run. So unable to stand it anymore, Ayuru like took off running towards them, or Ayuru bolted towards them. Patron A, mother, mother! Ayuru, unable to look on any longer, ran towards them. That works too. And remember how in the last episode of this series, in just a few paragraphs ago, Matuta, the last thing that she told Ayuru was, you wait here for me. But Tamarazu, unable to wait any longer, unable to stand it, unable to look on any longer, I kind of like that, ran towards them. Patron B, mother, mother! Ayuru could stand it no more and rushed towards them. Ayuru could stand it no more and rush towards them? That's kind of weird. Oh, it's not wrong. I don't know, it just sounds a little bit strange to me. Could stand it no more and rush to them. Rush towards them. I don't know, does that sound weird to anybody else? Maybe it's just me. But I like could stand it no more. Small Sarah, mother, mother! Ayuru, not able to stand still anymore, ran after his mother. Okay, yeah, this is pretty much exactly what it was in Japanese. Ayuru, not able to stand still anymore, ran after his mother. Not able to stand still anymore, I don't know, that paints more of a picture of like, he's impatient or misbehaving versus like he's crying and screaming and terrified versus unable to stand still anymore. But it still works. The next line, sudeni heishira, I almost said heishitachi, heishira, ga haha no haigo ni made semariyotte ita. So sudeni is already. Heishira, so this ra, it's just like tachi. It pluralizes the soldier, so soldiers. Haha no haigo ni, her back, like behind her. Made semariyotte ita. So the soldiers were already all the way, like they had already closed in the gap all the way. They were like within reach of his mother's back, basically. Patron A, the soldiers had at last caught up to them. It's a little lacking, like word-wise. At last also makes it sound like, at last they've caught up to him, instead of like, oh no, they've caught up to them. Yeah, it's more like already versus at last, or like, but it was too late, or something like that. Patron B, but it was too late. Yes, this is excellent. The soldiers were already at her back. Yeah, this is really nice and clean. In Japanese, it's sort of like, sudeni, already, the soldiers were all the way, already. Like, they kind of have this already vibe going on twice. Haigo ni made, semari yoteita. That also implies like already they were. But I like, it's very clean, and I like beginning the whole thing with, but it was too late, because that's what happened, but it was too late. The soldiers were already at her back. Yes, stellar. Small Sarah. But then, yeah, it definitely needs a but, at the very least. But then the soldiers caught up to his mother's back. It's more like, yeah, they had already caught up to. I think small Sarah probably didn't understand what Sudeni is. Sudeni is already. And it does have this sort of like, it's too late, it's already happened. The soldiers caught up to his mother's back. Yep, a little confused on the tense there, small Sarah, but nice try. Next line. 母に向かって振り上げられた3本もの剣の切っ先が朝日にぎらりと反射した。So, 母に向かって, we have a lot of に向かう and に向かって in this episode. So, towards his mother, basically. 振り上げられた. So, like the raised or the brandished. 3本もの剣. So, the 3 swords. No kisaki. So, the tips of the 3 swords that were brandished towards his mother. Asahi ni. Asahi, if you look at the kanji, it literally means morning sun. And that's what it means, the morning sun or the sunlight. Not the sunlight, the sunrise. Girarito. So kirarito is like a sparkly sort of gleam. Girarito is more like a harsh gleam. Hanshashita is reflected. So the tips of the 3 brandished swords raised at his mother like gleamed harshly or glaringly in the morning sun, basically is what that means. Patron A, they raised 3 swords toward Matuta's backside, the tips of their blades glinting in the morning sun. I like glinting. That's really good for that. Matuta's backside, to me, I think of butt when I hear the word backside. Even though, yeah, it's like literally the backside of her body, versus the front side of her body. But yeah, my brain automatically just thinks butt when I hear backside. Yeah, and even in the Japanese, it doesn't say that they're raising them towards her backside. Like, you can already tell that it was at her backside. You don't even need that it was raised towards her backside. Just towards Matuta would work just fine. But yeah, I like the tips of their blades glinting in the morning sun after the comma. That's a really good way of describing that. Patron B, the tips of their 3 raised swords gleamed in the morning light. That works if you connect it with the sentence right before it, but it was too late. The soldiers were already at her back. The tips of their 3 raised swords gleamed in the morning light. Because, like, you don't need, it's redundant in Japanese even to be like, haha ni mukatte. Like, you don't even need that part. You could have just started the sentence with, furiagerareta sanban mono ken no kisaki ga. Like, we already know that they're raised towards his mother because of the sentence that came right before it. So yeah, like, leaving out the part that their swords were raised at her is fine because, like, we know that. The tips of their 3 raised swords gleamed in the morning light. I like that. Small Sarah. The tips of 3 swords pointed at Matuta, reflecting in the sunrise. Yeah, yeah, it's not really like a sentence exactly. It's just kind of describing something. Oh no, the tips of 3 swords pointed at Matuta, reflecting in the sunrise. I thought it was pointing at Matuta. Yeah, the tips of 3 swords pointed at Matuta, reflecting in the sunrise. Okay. Yeah, like reflecting in the sunrise, but like we need that metaphor that like reflecting like harshly, like cruelly. Gleam kind of carries that. I really like glinting. Reflecting is kind of lacking there. The tips of 3 swords. Yeah, literally in the Japanese, it's just 3 swords. It might be a bit stronger to say like their 3 swords. Maybe just 3 sword tips pointed at Matuta, reflecting in the sun. I don't know, that sounds weird too. Yeah, I think the tips of their 3 swords pointed at Matuta, reflecting in the sunrise. Yeah, that's okay. I think my brain just broke. And I misread pointed as pointing. That's all right. I think I like Patron B's better, though. And then Ayuru screams, "Kasama, Taria!" followed by 4 exclamation points. And then tachidomari, koe wo kagiri ni wameita. So tachidomari is to stop in your tracks. Like you were running or you were walking and then you just stop, you come to a dead stop. Koe wo kagiri ni wameita. He screamed like as hard as his voice would go, basically. Kagiri ni is like to the limit, to the max. So patron A, Ayuru stopped dead in his tracks. Good for tachidomari. "Mother, Talia!" he yelled at the top of his voice. I like at the top of his voice for koe wo kagiri ni. And I like the rearranging of the things here. Ayuru stopped dead in his tracks and then he screamed their names. I like that. It paints a good picture. I think screamed might be better than yelled, just because it makes it seem more frightening, I guess, than yelling. You can yell in anger and you can yell commands at people, but you scream when you're like emotionally out of control, which he is. Patron B, "Mother, Taria!" in caps. I think that was a good call. Basically translating these 4 exclamation points and all the small tsus into just all caps. I mean, it depends on your editor and your copy editor and stuff, if they allow you to do stuff like that. But I do think that occasionally it definitely is warranted to like have people screaming in all caps. Or italics will sometimes do the trick. Ayuru stopped short and screamed their names at the top of his lungs. I like that too. Like scream at the top of his lungs. Like reading that, I get a visceral sense. Like I can feel myself like screaming, and how whenever I've screamed at the top of my lungs like that, I can just feel how it hurts to do that. So this is visceral, which I really like. And then small Sarah, "Mother, Taria!" he yelled, stopping dead in his tracks. That's okay, that works as well. I think it works better to do what Patron B. Like Patron B and small Sarah kind of took the same approach here. We started with, just like in Japanese, we started with him yelling their names, and then we did a dialogue tag. But Patron B did the dialogue tag as its own sentence, which I think works better instead of, "Mother, Taria!" he yelled, stopping dead in his tracks. I don't know. Like, notice just how that kind of feels a little bit different to have a dialogue tag as a comma at right after a line of dialogue versus having it just be a sentence that comes right after. And then also what Patron A did, kind of splitting up the whole stopping dead in his tracks and then yelling part. And again, like I think screamed at the top of his lungs paints a much better picture viscerally than just what Patron A and small Sarah did, just yelling. Like it's not wrong, he is yelling. And small Sarah even left out the part where he's like yelling at the top of his voice or yelling as loud as he could or yelling with all of his might or something like that. Just he yelled. That's just, that's lacking there, small Sarah. All right, the last 2 sections of this series are actually shorter than the others. So this is the end of episode 25 of Let's Translate Light Novels. I know, there's only 1 more episode to go. Oh my goodness. I hope you'll join me for the final episode, so you'll see what happens at the end of this chapter. It's not very happy, I'll warn you, but this is the villain of Fushigi Yuugi in his prequel. He had to have a tragic childhood to become as evil as he did. Anyway, thank you for everyone who has followed this series so far and for everyone who has translated for this series. I'd especially like to thank, as always, Greg, Lay, Henry Rimming, and Data Fox, my super patrons. And I'll see you next time for episode 26.